Welcome to this episode of the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, a guest who has been an incredible visionary leader and made an impact not just in Wisconsin, but so far beyond. Dr. Don Niles started his career as a dairy veterinarian and went on to become a partner in Dairy Dreams, as well as the veterinary advisor for Pagel Family Businesses. And Don's impact not only extended from being a leader and looking at the care of cows to bringing in technology, to engaging into the community, but also being a visionary for putting all of these pieces together for the greater good for cows, for people, and for the land. And in this conversation today, as I sit down with Dr. Don Niles, we will tap into the journey, to his story of becoming a veterinarian, becoming a dairyman, the wisdom he's learned along the way, and his vision for the future of dairying, right here in part one of this episode in the High Performance Mindset series powered by NEDAP. NEDAP is future-proofing dairy farms through advancements in technologies in cow locating, milk metering, identification, and activity monitoring. Welcome, Don, to the Uplevel Dairy Podcast.
Thank you for coming and talking to me. I appreciate that.
Don, it's my greatest pleasure to sit down with you today. And what we'll be covering is the impact that you've had and how you have really had a visionary mindset of looking at cows, at looking at animal care, technology, engaging the community, and been able to bring all of those pieces together for the greater good of cows, people, and the land. And in the time that we have together today, Don, we are going to be walking through the journey that took you to becoming a veterinarian, then a dairyman, the wisdom that you've picked up along the way, and what you see as the future of the dairy industry and veterinary medicine as well. And so, Don, walk us through the journey. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you first become a veterinarian?
That's way back. That was a long time ago. I was raised in the suburbs of southeast Wisconsin, and we started in Brookfield and moved out to Neshota, which is near Heartland and Oconomowoc. And I had nothing to do with agriculture besides being a consumer of food. I knew nothing about farming. I was aware that food came from farms, but that's about as far as I took it. And was looking to have a career either as a physician, a human doctor, or go to the Naval Academy. I had an offer for a Navy ROTC, become a naval officer. And I was debating those two different courses of action. And I was in high school, and I was given a copy of All Creatures Great and Small as a Christmas gift from my mother. And good stories. It was fascinating how a person was working on cows as a medical professional, and was using his skills on farms and animals instead of in human hospitals like I was more familiar with. So I found a job working as a volunteer at first with a local small animal veterinarian, Dr. Jeff Gaver. And Jeff was a mentor and a leader and had a fabulous sense of humor. And he was kind enough to take me as a sophomore in high school into his clinic and let me help out with a few things. And eventually it became a job for summers and weekends. But Jeff really inspired in me a sense of how fun it would be to be in veterinary medicine instead of human medicine. So I kind of converted over to that way of thinking, but Dr. Gaver only took care of small animals, dogs, cats. And that's all I knew myself. And one day he told me, well, you're going to have to spend a day doing some farm calls with Dr. Randy Schuett, a friend of his who was in large animal practice. And I said, well, why is that necessary? I don't know anything about farm animals. Dogs and cats are just fine for what we're doing here. Jeff said, no, you should see the other side. And I did, and spent several days with Dr. Schuett. And my eyes were open to a whole nother area of veterinary medical practice, and that was working on the farm animals. And in Randy's case, it was almost all cows and a few horses. And that was all down in southeast Wisconsin. I was able to get into the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine in 1978. And as I was starting at the veterinary school, I was starting to realize that I had actually been a lot more interested in the cows and horses that we were working on than the dogs and the cats. So it just slowly transferred in my mind, and I read a copy of All Creatures Great and Small, and then the other books by the same author, James Herriot, and I was thinking, okay, that's what's for me, would be working on large farm animals. So you have all 4 years in veterinary school to learn about large and small animals, which I did, but by the time I came out of school in '82, I was convinced that farm animal practice was much more of interest to me. Mm-hmm. But farm animal practice back in those days was quite different than it is now. The average herd size, when I first got to Casco in 1983, the average herd size here would be about 50 cows. For every 100 cow farm, there was a 20 cow farm also to balance it out. So it was pretty typical average size. And the dairy community here was mostly from Belgium, second or third generation Belgians, and they were very good with their cows. The cows were here. The people from Belgium brought them here because we had great ground for alfalfa, nice cool breezes coming out across Lake Michigan and the Bay of Green Bay. So it's an ideal place for dairy cows. Cows have trouble getting cool. They don't have trouble staying warm. So this is a great place for them to be. And the industry took off here, but it was still small individual farms, family farms at that time. As things grew, we started to find things that we could do with dairy cows to help out in ways beyond just treating a sick cow. Being called for a cow with a DA that needed to have surgery, or a cow with hardware disease or something. Then we started looking at there's different ways we can design our practices with cows to not have so many broken cows that we needed to fix, but to keep cows from becoming broken. And that was really, it sounds silly now, but that was really revolutionary back at that time. We were more just like ambulances up until that point, chasing after sick cows and trying to make them better. And then we started having techniques come along like professional foot trimmers could do a much better job instead of us picking up one cow's leg at a time with a hoof knife to try to treat her lameness, and having a rope and a beam above our heads that was hopefully going to keep that leg up in the air long enough to work. And we started having professional foot trimmers around here. And boy, that improved everybody's life. Our backs felt better. The cows got better foot care. The farmers were able to design programs of not just having one lame animal worked on, but having all of his animals worked on to keep their feet in good shape. That would be one of the kinds of changes we saw. But we also started seeing some herd expansions and hearing about crazy things like 1,000 cow dairies in California. And I remember first hearing about those and talking to John Pagel and saying, I can't even picture that. How do you handle 1,000 cows? We couldn't even fathom that. So John, being the good friend and great client that he was also motivated along those lines. So we started traveling everywhere. If John heard about a meeting in New York being put on by dairy builder, we'd go there to listen to the presentations and learn about what they were doing out there, and just be thinking about it. We'd talk all the way home because we couldn't afford to fly, so we'd be driving to those meetings, and then we'd talk all the way back. We went out to Idaho. Interestingly enough, we went out to Idaho because we wanted to look at freestall barns. And John had not gotten good information, so when he got there, we found those were all open lot dairies. So we actually took a builder with us, but there were no buildings for him to look at. But we talked to those dairymen, and the dairy industry is amazing. We'd be there visiting a person we'd never met before, and at some point he'd just invite us into his house to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about what they're doing and what their plans are. And you couldn't have gone to somebody who owned any kind of a business and would bring his future competitors into his house to talk about how to improve his business and in turn your business. But that's what we found in the dairy industry. These guys were tickled pink that somebody wanted to talk about what they were doing, and then John was very visionary himself, so he'd be pushing questions back if you consider this and consider that, and we'd have great conversations with people we'd never met before. You don't see that, I think, in just about any other business where people are sharing with their potential competitors. So we kept traveling and looking and seeing what was possible. And John eventually decided to expand his operation. At that time, when he started out, he had 78 cows. At this point, he had about 200 cows. But then he decided to expand, a major expansion, up to 900 cows, which is the most either one of us had ever had a chance to work with. And all that meant is now we're learning more about stall design and comfortable cows, and realizing from other people sharing the mistakes they'd made that if you get some of these things wrong, you're going to live with them for a long, long time. So we became obsessive about looking at stall design and measuring and talking to people and seeing what was working and what wasn't working. And we're able to create a better picture in our minds as to what we would have to do. Things like self-locking stalls were new in this area at that time, but we put in the self-locking stalls so that we could conveniently work on the cows and comfortably work on the cows, and then they could be free to go lay down after that. That was a big improvement at that time. We could talk more about that later, but that was a big improvement at that time. So we were just looking at all these different ways to modernize and expand and make his operation more viable for the future. So we did that for quite some time, and there was some other expansions occurring here in Kewaunee County. Each place, even our local other neighboring farms, would say, come over, we're planning this project, take a look at what we're going to think about doing, what do you tell us what you think? And it was a lot of sharing, a lot of wide open, this is our plans, what do you think, kind of conversations. So it was, we were just on the verge of this enormous transformation, and it was still kind of hard to see what a transformation it was going to be.
So you didn't know what you were a part of yet at that point.
Correct.
There was momentum building, there was excitement, and a phrase you used a little bit earlier on in the story you were just sharing, it was seeing what was possible. And at that time, this was the 90s, when you really started to pose the question of what's possible, in the greatest, grandest visions that you and John had as you were driving across the country and visiting with other dairymen, seeing things that others in this area had never seen, what did you, in the greatest vision and John's greatest vision, ever think you could do right here in Kewaunee County, Wisconsin?
I would say John is about the only person I knew at that time that could see that. He could see what could be here. I was thinking that sooner or later we'd have a 1,000-cow dairy, and that would be like the biggest thing you could possibly imagine in the world. And John was thinking about, well, what does that mean for a 5,000-cow dairy? And just running along to keep up with him sometimes was a big part of the challenge. But his job was thinking of those things. My job was thinking of, okay, if we're going to do that, how are we going to keep those cows comfortable and let them just be cows and be productive and healthy and comfortable, as opposed to building a facility that we really didn't have any idea how to match with the cows, and having cows be uncomfortable, maybe in poor ventilation, kind of a dead-end scenario for dairy modernization. So that's why we kept doing these trips, because we wanted to see what else was out there. We wanted people to show us their mistakes so they could help us not make the same mistakes, so we could make different mistakes. And that's how it grew. But John was the driving force, and that there could be more and more.
As you share this relationship and the perspectives that you and John Pagel shared, how you worked together but had different viewpoints or different vantage points that you were able to see, it brings up the analogy that every great business has a visionary and an architect. And John, from what it sounds like as you recount this journey, was very much that person that could see a vision beyond what others could see. And in your mind, you were the architect. You were already designing in your head how to make that possible.
With your analogy, John was the visionary. John was the one who said, we're going to get this done. He had the ability to talk to lenders, and that wasn't my world. But John was very clear about his plans, very passionate about his plans, and he could explain these things to the lenders. My job, and I always kind of joked about it with John, was that his job was to build it. My job was to make the pieces work once you built it. and tweak then whatever we needed to tweak. One of the clearest examples I remember is John had a freestall barn with about 200 cows in it, and they had concrete stalls and closed up sidewalls, no open sidewalls. And in the spring, we get the first warm weather, and John would then open up the doors and let these cows be outside and lounge around outside. And he said that it was always the thing where he'd open that door the first time in the spring, roll the door open, and he'd jump out of the way because those cows are coming barreling out of that barn to get outside. And he'd always talked about that and kind of chuckled, "You've got to be careful." And the time came where our first real modernization in his facility was that barn, and we took out the belt feeder and put in drive-through feeding. We took the walls off and put curtain sidewalls on. We put fans on. These were the kinds of fans we were using back in the 90s, and put fans in. And without even thinking that anything was different, that first spring day with that new barn, John opened the door like he always had, jumped out of the way, and no cows came out. So we find out what's going on. Is there another gate? So we looked around the corner, and they were laying in their stalls. They were chewing their cud. They looked happy as could be. And that, you talk about an aha moment. You thought the norm was cows racing past you because they wanted to be outside. Well, the reason they wanted to be outside is they were miserable inside. It was too hot for them. They were creating a lot of heat that they couldn't get rid of. They were laying on concrete, which wasn't a big favorite of theirs either. So part of it was finding out these ideas to try, and the other part of it was assessing, boy, we really did something here. This is pretty cool. And I think everybody knows now cow comfort is such an incredible thing. Cow comfort really wasn't even a phrase back in the 90s, but that was it. And you talk about being convinced with one try, something like that. Was it, okay, from here on out, anything we do is going to be well ventilated. It's going to have soft, comfortable beds for the cows, and it's going to be designed for those cows to want to be there, not to want to be out of there.
Wow, so this is really one of the early barn designs or barn modifications that the two of you came up with. And I just have to think back and wonder, did some of the neighbors think you guys were crazy when you were putting these curtains up and putting up fans, things that others weren't doing? But you knew there was something that could be done.
Well, realize John already had a strong reputation for doing crazy things, so nobody was surprised there. I was the more conservative, by the book guy, and yet I was the one saying, we've got to find out what works so well here so we could be doing it someplace else. And John was always going there, finding new options where he could make more expansions. How could he change things? My job was just to come along and make sure that it was working well for the cows and for the employees, beyond just getting big. And so we really meshed together because of our shared interests, but different approaches to it.
So you were spending a lot of time with John as a key advisor, as the person right next to him in the seat of the truck, having conversations about what you were seeing in other dairies across the country, dreaming of the implementation of what that could be back here at the home dairy in Kewaunee County. And all this time you were still a practicing veterinarian,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I was still in a 5-man practice in Casco.
Yeah, and eventually you became vested in John's business.
Well, yes, there was a step in between those two things.
What was the step in between?
So I was seeing changes not only on John's side in the dairy facilities, the dairy management. I was seeing changes with the veterinarians too. Now the veterinarians we were spending less time picking up an individual hoof, as we mentioned, or treating cows that had problems because of the way we fed them, or the way we kept them comfortable, or the way we monitored them. So an opportunity came up for me to work for Monsanto as a technical service veterinarian, and that would be in California. Well, it didn't appeal to me to do that in Wisconsin, where I was always familiar, but when I thought, well, this is going to be the chance to go out with these 1,000+ cow dairies and spend time and learn about them out there. So I took that opportunity. in 98. And John, he wasn't thrilled that we were diverging paths, but he also understood that whatever I learned out there, I could bring back and share here, and we'd figure out some way to keep that communication going. So we moved out there in 98, Ann and I and the kids, and my life out there was it was a blast for 3 years. We were going from one farm to another to talk about cow comfort or foot health or digestive health or food quality for the cows. I mean, it was just a great place to be, like in this big sandbox of all these big dairies and learning what they're doing, and realizing that those guys out there had being big down pretty well, but they didn't necessarily have caring for the cows down as well. It was more concrete, more expansion, being bigger, and great dairymen out there, some wonderful friends and really good people, but not really the focus. Most of those people out there didn't start like John with 78 cows that he was milking himself and was responsible for. So in some ways, those operations skipped some steps to get to be that big. And now my new job out there was to go around and with the Monsanto representative and just talk to them about their ventilation or their feed ration or maternity protocols or anything that could help that client be a better dairyman and therefore be a Monsanto customer was how that job was designed. So I spent 3 years going on big dairies, some working really well, some working not so well, learning a lot every place I went. Once again in California, now with the Dutch dairyman versus the Belgian dairyman here, being invited into people's kitchens and, Don, what do you want to talk about today? You just walked around the facility, what did you see? What can we do better? And just great conversations in an entire different group of people. So I thought, well, this is what life is now. This is what I'll be doing. And then John called in 2000 and said, enough time clowning around there in California. Now it's time to come back here and you and I will build a dairy together back in Casco. So that was the next big step, is leaving a job where I was an advisor to dairymen to coming home and being a dairyman.
Yeah.
And I was honored and excited to do that with John. I was terrified to do that with John. I mean, we were talking about numbers that would never occur to a veterinarian practice as far as what we were having to spend on technology and how important it was to design it right now, because now it's concrete and you're not going to be changing it anytime soon. So we came home and designed Dairy Dreams, started milking cows here in 2002, and my job at that point became to be the managing partner at Dairy Dreams, while John was responsible for running his dairy, Pagels Ponderosa. We're about 12 miles apart, so we were obviously in very close contact, but it was really a dream opportunity to come and try myself the things that I've been recommending to other people to do, and finding out what some of my great ideas weren't so great, and some of my great ideas did pretty well. So you start now being responsible for your own success and your own failures, and that's pretty motivating.
So take me back to the moment when John gave you the call and said, it's time. It's time. Now it's go time. And I can just about feel the intensity in John's voice when he probably said, come on, Don, let's get back. Let's get you back here. Let's do this. Was there any hesitation to make such a huge change? You're moving back halfway across the country in your career, from transitioning from being a consulting veterinarian through Monsanto to now being a dairyman, and as you said, taking responsibility for all of those recommendations and all of those management decisions. Was there ever a moment where you questioned or second guessed or had to just really search your soul if it was the right decision to say yes to John Pagel?
Plenty of times. And I think it's because it was John Pagel that I had the confidence and the capacity to say, this is going to work. We're going to find a way to make this all work. So on the one hand, I never felt that this is the wrong thing to do, but also I didn't sleep very well for a long period of time because we were taking on levels of debt that no practicing veterinarian could have ever imagined in his life. And in reality, having to be responsible for the consequences of my decisions and my planning and John's decisions and planning that we did together. So instead of advising somebody on how to design free stalls or how to manage the flow to the parlor, I was going to be doing that myself and responsible for that. And it was very humbling to have that opportunity to show success, while also having the risk of showing non-success.
So this was Dairy Dreams.
Correct.
That you were building.
Yep.
Where'd that name come from?
John's Bar. we were still under plans. We hadn't even started construction, but then I was coming back from California and spending time with John, and we have meetings on his dairy getting the plans made. So as you know, John's planning process continued on usually into the tavern situation. And in this particular case, it was in his house. He had all his managers come in because I'd just gotten back in from California and we were having a nice time and catching up a little bit. And one of the jobs for that night around John's Bar was to come up with a name for the new dairy. So there were lots of names floated, some of which we can't print. and we decided the winner was Dairy Dreams, and the logo would be a cow jumping over the moon for Dairy Dreams.
And so Dairy Dreams was born.
Dairy Dreams was born, and John was still 900 cows at that time, and Kinnards were about 900 cows. So when we built Dairy Dreams at 1,200 cows, that was the largest dairy in Kewaunee County.
Wow.
Looking back, 1,200 cows now would be about the 20th largest in Kewaunee County. So we were just getting to the cusp of this huge change coming in the industry.
Wow. So a huge change. You were on the forefront of this. You were literally building out this dream at Dairy Dreams. And so when you think about the best decisions that you made as that person that was looking at how can we take the best care of cows, provide ultimate cow comfort, take good care of people, anything that stands out in your mind as some of the best decisions that you were able to make in that original construction that have stood the test of time?
Well, that's interesting because a lot of our best decisions are behind us and have changed now. Putting sand free stalls in Dairy Dreams was a pretty revolutionary thing at the time. Sand came with its own challenges to handle, and we went from the kind of bedded concrete stalls that were more common at that time, and we put in the deep bedded sand free stalls at that time. And we had, at that point, the best cow comfort I had ever seen from any of the places I was visiting. That would include open lot dairies out in California where they had no free stalls to worry about. They're just under sunshades, and some older typical free stalls here in the area. But sand also came with some real heartbreaking challenges. It ends up in your manure system somewhere where you don't want it, and dealing with that and the backed up flume pipes in the middle of the night that you get called in for. It brought its own challenges, but it clearly was giving us a level of cow comfort that we just had never seen before. The cow was chewing their cuds and looking relaxed and high production. Every sign we had that we'd done something good for the cows and they were appreciating it. But it was different because a lot of that was being just invented at that time, and there were all kinds of people with safer alternatives like different kind of bedders and things like that. So the deep bedded free stalls with sand bedding was rather revolutionary and was a life changer for both us and our cows.
Wow. And so you were some of the first in the area, in the region, to start bringing in some of these at the time, new ideas that have now become common practice, gold standards, some might even say. And you had that, you could see that at the time that was going to be the best decision in the moment, but it turned out to be some of the best decisions that others have continued to take those ideas and use them to revolutionize the way we care for cows across the industry. And Don, as you reflect on the journey that created Dairy Dreams and this partnership, this incredible business relationship, also friendship with John Pagel as well, what do you recall being some of the biggest challenges that the two of you ran into as you made that dairy dream come true?
Biggest challenge we encountered was for the 3 months before we milked our first cow. We were experiencing record high milk prices in Wisconsin, wishing that we had those barns populated because the construction was nearing completion. The milk prices were great. We wanted to get in there. And within a month of populating the first barn, milk prices just collapsed. So the real world lesson for me, and this sounds really simplistic, and anybody should have realized this, but I'd really never been in a position before where milk price had such an enormous effect on me and my success. So it became much more real than, instead of being an advisor to a veterinarian or to a dairyman, to be one. And it made those decisions that much more weighty because literally you get one or two of those big decisions wrong and you're not going to have your farm anymore. So the potential for having great success was higher as an owner and a partner on large successful dairy than it was in anything I could imagine doing in practice. On the other hand, the potential for incalculable personal disaster was also much greater in that situation. So I think as I look back on that, that was the scariest time in my life. It was certainly the scariest time in my family's eyes, and especially because she, as my wife, understood, as she's a CPA, so she understood very well some of the things that we were undertaking for risk. And it was the ultimate believe in yourself. And it wasn't just believing in myself, it was believing in myself as a partner of John, which was huge. If I just had the notion of doing this myself, I don't know if I would have had the wherewithal or even the courage and confidence to do it. But having a guy like John who says, yeah, let's give it a try. We're gonna do this. If it doesn't work, we'll do this over here. And he made things work. So I think that the most important thing for me was having such a solid, confident partner and another set of eyes and imagination for what can we do from a comfort point of view that we've never done before. And that's what we did. But it was a much scarier lifestyle than practice had been.
Yeah, a higher risk.
Higher risk, higher reward.
Yes, high risk, high reward. And
then there were all these other large dairymen around here who would have been my clients saying, okay, let's see how he can do it now. So there are a whole lot of eyes looking over the fence just to see how things would go.
There's a lot of pressure. A lot of real pressure, and also just that feeling of pressure to succeed. I know you mentioned just how instrumental John's presence and motivation was during that time. What else got you through it? How did you navigate that sort of real challenge that you were faced with of the financial implications of taking such a risk?
Well, my wife, Ann, was like I say, savvy about business and accounting, and her support that we're taking this under. It's the scariest thing we've ever done, but I have confidence in you, which she would say to me, and that motivated you that much more, because when somebody tells you that you respect and love that much, that they have confidence in you, you better make it work, because they don't want to give that confidence away easily. So Ann was very motivating. John, as a partner, was he'd find the upside to anything. You know, he'd be frustrated with a problem just like anybody else, but he'd come up with some ideas and solutions, and let's try this and let's try this, and there was just no quitting that guy. He was going to find a way to make what we were doing successful. As we went through expansions and changing the facilities, John was always the one who was the most comfortable. Let's take that next big step, and let's do this big step over here. And it gave you a lot of energy. Instead of having somebody second guessing you, you had somebody kind of prodding you. What's next? What can we do better?
So the two of you had a really incredible business partnership, but more so friendship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The laughs we had just driving across the country all night long to get to a seminar that we were going to somewhere else in the country, just to get back to work as soon as we could in 2 days. There were a lot of good conversations.
Yeah. Conversations that you don't forget, conversations
Yep.
that were the start of ideas and things that were implemented at Dairy Dreams, at Pagel's Ponderosa, and implemented there, but then implemented across the Midwest and beyond, because of the ideas that the two of you were able to generate, put into action, test, trial, and really become a testing ground for others to follow. And I think that speaks to just the visionary leadership that was a combination of your two minds together, of being able to see what was possible and being able to figure out how to make it work. That was your job, how to make it work.
And John's job was to help making sure that we were in between the lines while we were going, and that financially we weren't getting ourselves into a precarious position, or weren't getting over leveraged here, or gonna do something that would cause us problems with nutrient runoff and things like that I wasn't very familiar with. So John is not only a friend and a partner, but as a mentor in a lot of areas, was crucial to us doing what we could do together.
Yeah. And Don, so many of us in the industry, we remember the day, and we know the tragic story. And how did things change for you when John passed?
Of course, the accident was devastating.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, we didn't just lose one person, we lost two. And Steve was John's son-in-law, was also a mover and a motivator in our businesses. Steve was one of those guys, you could be in the most miserable situation you could possibly imagine, doing something with a cow or whatever, and it wasn't working very well, and it'd be 90 degrees outside, and there'd be flies buzzing around, and Steve would just walk in and say, "Well, Don, how are you doing?" And you'd have, "Well, look at this, Steve." We'd have a good laugh, and he'd leave 3 minutes later, and you'd feel great. He had that positive energy also. So we lost two wonderful people at the same time, and if you look at a person's legacy by how things develop when they're no longer available, that's really the true judgment. And in this case, JJ and John's other kids, all three of them have stepped in one way or another to carrying on the legacy. And boy, you can see that. You can see parts of John and not only JJ and Jamie and Brian also. And now you can see an operation or business that's flourishing beyond the point where it was when John was still with us. And man, if there'd be anybody who'd be happiest about that in the world, it'd be John, looking down and seeing how they're doing. So nobody was prepared for this. You couldn't be prepared for this happening. But the ability for the family leadership to step in, and I remember JJ getting everybody together the day after the accident and saying, I'd been in Texas at the time for a meeting and flew back overnight to be back here. And then JJ got everybody together and said, something terrible has happened. and we're going to get through it. We don't know how, but we're going to get through it. And boy, have we.
Yeah.
And so much is owed to that next generation and what they picked up and how they were able to step in and go. I'm just so proud of everybody.
So in your eyes, is that true legacy and leadership is what you see now?
I think the book definition of legacy is what you see now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that you bring up this word legacy, because 3 years ago, you and I sat down in the basement here at your house for a podcast interview back in my previous role with the publication. And I remember you saying that one of the things that most dairy producers really want to leave at the end of the day is a legacy. And that might be different for each person, but that's part of that core motivation. And so for you, let's switch gears to legacy and what that means to you and for you, Don. You've had an incredible career in this industry. You've made incredible impacts, and you're not done yet. People are still tapping into your knowledge from around the world because of the respect they have for you, the way you think, the way you do things. What do you want your legacy to be?
I would like it to be that we had so many people that shared with us tidbits of information that we would need to be successful, that we have also always tried to be that for other people. And things we've done here, we've been lucky enough to give presentations around the world to Dairyman about what we're doing here in Casco. And boy, I get a lot of energy from that, because those people are maybe a lot more like the Casco of the 90s. And when you start talking to them about 3,000 cow dairies and maternity protocols where you've got one person on each shift responsible for just maternity, and then how well trained that person can be. It'd be like a human obstetrical nurse, to be that well trained and experienced in that, and how that can affect your next generation of animals coming in. I'd love giving presentations about that around the world, and dairymen are interested in that. So that's part of what we benefited from is people sharing with us, and I think it's part of our legacy now is to share with those. So things of that nature. Dairymen are just real interested in how to be better dairymen, as the most part, or at least the ones that come to meetings are, and the ones that we run into. I know one of the most critical things, positively critical things we've seen is, and this is our experience, and other people can have their own opinions, but since we stopped locking up our cows with headlockers, it's been an absolute night and day difference from how we managed cows before and how those cows could perform compared to the way they did before. John was the first set of self-lockers that went into here in Kewaunee County in his expansion before I went to California. And I loved that, because now I'd come to do preg checks, and the cows that we were going to check that day were all locked. You go quickly check them, you release them from their lock, they'd go lay down, life was good. But you might have been half an hour late because you had another call that you had to do first, so the cows stood there for a little bit longer. Or it could have been a day where the parlor was a little bit behind, or the people in the dairy that were going to do the herd check were a little bit behind, so there was a little more wait time there. And for me, the fact that I was no longer walking into a parlor trying to pregnancy check a cow in a parlor, where we used to run them in there to do a herd check, and instead I had them all locked up and boom, 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 go down. That was wonderful for me, and better for the cows because they didn't get moved around as much. So I would say that the first best day I ever had as a veterinarian working on dairy cows was the day John Pagel put in his first self-lockers, and I had all these cows to go check nicely and conveniently. As the years went on, and we found new technologies and tried new things, and we realized that no matter how good you are, sometimes those cows are standing locked up longer than they should. Something else came, there was an emergency over here, or somebody got mixed up on the computer, or something didn't go well, and those cows weren't locked up for 45 minutes, they were locked up for an hour and 45 minutes. And you knew that wasn't good, but you thought, well, okay, it is what it is. So we built the newest facility to have no self-lockers. And we took the self-lockers out, either took them out or stopped using them from our other facilities. So now cows would go into pens with headlocks, but we'd never set the headlocks because we came up with technologies where we didn't need to. All the injections that we need to give cows for reproduction and for vaccinations, we can do with an air injection system that we use in the parlor, where either in the neck for the parallel parlor or in the back leg for the rotary parlor, we're able to give all those injections, and cows hardly feel anything. They don't mind it. It's not like a needle. You don't have the ability to transmit diseases like you would with a needle. So we handle all that in there. And then the pregnancy checking, we can just sort those few cows out from that pen on herd check day that need to be checked, and everybody else just gets to go back and lay down. And in both facilities, and people look at me skeptically on this, but in both facilities, we went up over 10 pounds per cow in the first several months and have maintained that since making that change. So I think that probably the most exciting thing now is seeing the impact that we're having on cows' lives, not just people's lives. And to not be laying down, not have to lay down, that's huge. The activity systems will tell us if a cow might be sick and we need to check her. It's going to tell us if a cow is in heat, so we need to breed her, so we can just sort out those few cows. But that increase in milk production, I strongly believe, is simply because we're not locking cows up anymore. I think that we long had the sense that the less cows were working for you and the more they were just taking care of themselves, the better they did. Whether it be having a properly balanced ration for them instead of a poorly balanced ration, whether it be having beds that are properly bedded and taken care of, or they're hard and uncomfortable for the cows. Any of these things that we would do, I think we got so used to doing them. And like the needles, for example, people would say, well, they talk to us about using a system like that. We say, well, I don't think the needles are really a problem. The cows don't seem to mind it too much. Well, who asked the cows? I don't think we could do it the way we're doing it in the parlor using needles. So I just think we get so used to doing things the way we do them, and we say the cows don't seem to mind. But how would the cows really tell us that they minded? And I think by going up milk so dramatically, when we change systems, that's the cows telling us that they minded. We use the analogy of when we go down to visit relations in Chicago when I was a kid. You go down on that interstate and you get on the toll road around Chicago, and there's a 90-degree day outside, and nobody had air conditioning in their cars back in those days, and it'd be this long line going into 2 or 3 different gates for giving them your money for toll and getting some change back and going. And you'd just be creeping along, and there's no air conditioning in the car, the windows are open, it's 90 degrees outside, everybody's miserable. And then finally you get through that after 20 minutes of creeping up, you get through there and you're taking off, the wind is going, you feel good again. Well, what if we don't have to go through that step? Like nowadays, you just drive through and your transponder reads that you went through, and you pay your taxes or your toll fees automatically without ever slowing down or ever getting hotter like that. That's what cows are doing now. If you look at the John Hancock building, I have a picture of that I sometimes use in presentations in Chicago. It's 100 stories tall. And if you had a job in that building on the top floor, and your job was, let's say, testing treadmills for workouts, on top floor, that was your job. All day long for 8-hour shift, you just test treadmills. And you got paid by how many treadmills you could test. And then one day a week, instead of taking the elevator up, that elevator didn't work, you have to take the stairs up. So now you're walking up 100 flights of stairs, which is going to take you about 45 minutes, about the amount of time a cow is locked up in a self-locker. How productive are you going to be when you walked up for 45 minutes on all those stairs versus just scooting up on the elevator? I think that's where it is for cows right now, is we've got to look at it from their point of view. what's going to work out best for them to use as much of their energy as they can to make milk and not have to waste that energy by standing up or breathing rapidly to get rid of the heat that they're picking up. What can we be doing differently so the cows can just be cows? And I think that's the revolution that is just starting to happen now in the dairy businesses. How do we let cows be cows? And how do they show us that it's working for them?
You just heard Dr. Don Niles' journey that led him to become a large animal veterinarian and then on to become a dairyman as a partner in Dairy Dreams Dairy. Come back to our next episode to hear more from Don as he talks about the grassroots efforts that created a farmer-driven sustainability group with measurable results and his thoughts on the future of dairying, both the opportunities and the threats that he sees ahead in part 2 of this very special Uplevel Dairy Podcast. This episode is part of our High Performance Mindset series powered by NEDAP. NEDAP is future-proofing dairy farms through advancements in technologies for cow locating, milk metering, identification, and activity monitoring. I'm Peggy Coffeen, and thank you for listening to the Uplevel Dairy Podcast.